Hello everybody, it is March the 4th and we are live for a really important episode of The View from the Top. We do have our special guest, Sean Luitjens, who's going to be talking about the amazing work they do at salary.com and how salary and payroll fits into mobility. But it's one of those weeks when there are important things that we just need to discuss. What we've seen in the last week is probably the biggest impact on our industry since COVID. And we want to talk about what that means from an immigration perspective, from a tax perspective, and really just to say to everybody in the industry that we are here for you, and we are here to answer your questions and to discuss things as we go forward. So I'm very honoured that we've got Julie Onslow-Cole, who's with us to talk about the immigration aspects of what's been going on in the Middle East and how that affects our employees and our people and our clients. And similarly, we've got Julie Barron from Vialto, who's going to be talking about that from the tax ramifications. So some really important stuff that we've got coming up. But as ever, there's other things to talk about, and we do want you to join in the conversation. So wherever you are in the world, do please write in the comments box, tell us what's going on in your world. If you've got questions as we go through, then do ask the questions. We are live on LinkedIn right now. We are live on YouTube, and of course, we are available on Spotify too. Now, a number of people do like to get their CPE codes, and we have loads of CPE codes for you. So if you want your codes from ERC, and many thanks to our good friends at ERC, those are the GMS and the CRP codes that are there. If you want your codes from HRCI or SHRM, then with many thanks to our good friends at Rocket Mortgage, those are the codes there. Rob Zeiss, hi Rob, Rob's in the house. No industry is better equipped to handle these types of situations than global mobility. That's a great point, Rob. And you know, there's some things that maybe we can't solve in these difficult times, but we will do what we can to give advice and to think about things in these fast-moving times. We're back next week, and we're going to be talking to Pearson, amazing company that I'm sure many of you know, and we're talking about how they have transformed their journey from being an analog publisher to the world's leading learning company powered by technology. And we've got their head of global mobility on the show with us next week. Meanwhile, what's been going on in the wonderful world of global mobility in the last 7 days? Well, you know what? Why don't we just take a look at the news? So there we have it. Congratulations to everyone who's been promoted, everyone who's got a new job. Happy holiday to everybody who is celebrating a wonderful, colourful and festive season. And indeed, if you've got a job you want to promote, then let us know. If you've had a promotion or a new job that you want to tell the world about, again, let us know and we'll do what we can to help. For next week, as I said, we've got the Pearson story, and we've got Alexandra Ada from Pearson. Amazing mobility professional. She will be on the show with us, so make sure you do tune in for that. Meanwhile, let's talk about global mobility and immigration from what's going on in the Middle East. There's no other subject that we could cover today. So Julia, and you can imagine, incredibly busy at the moment with crisis management. Everything's going on. So we're really pleased she's taken time out of her diary to make sure she is with us today. So everybody, you know how it works. Hit the heart button, hit the like button, hit the applause button, and let's welcome to our stage Global Mobility's one and only Julia Onslow Cole. Hey, Julia.
Hi, Brian.
Hi. So you're not, I know quite often you are in Dubai or Saudi, but you're not there at the moment.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not. No. I just wanted to say, before I start that, many of the people watching will have colleagues or friends or family across the region. And, I really hope that everyone is safe. And, we really recognise that this is a really difficult time for people. And I think a particularly difficult time for global mobility leaders, because they have to balance the duty of care for their employees and also business continuity in this really rapidly evolving situation. So I just wanted to start by saying, I'm really sorry to everyone for the situation, and I really want to try and help by just pointing out some sort of key issues, and I hope that this will be helpful. And Brian, as we key issues, and then I think what we should do is, I'll continually give weekly updates to make sure we're giving key points to everyone that's watching. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the operational picture across the region, look at some immigration concessions, some exit and compliance risks, talk about government repatriation developments, and then really what should HR and mobility teams be doing. The situation is so fluid, it's changing hour by hour. So obviously I'm giving you the information that I had up to about 2 hours ago. Just by way of context, as everyone knows, the 28th of February, the US and Israel launched a coordinated strike targeting Iran. And then in the days that followed, Iran responded with retaliatory actions, including missile and drone activity, and that impacted US facilities across the region. And since then, there's been continued exchanges, further strikes in Iran and Lebanon. And then the beginning of last weekend, we saw this intensifying across the region, and then multiple countries across the region, including Iran, Kuwait, Qatar, Israel, and UAE, they've implemented either full or partial airspace closure, and then many of the commercial airlines have suspended or rerouted flights at short notice. And as I just said before, that the conditions are changing hourly, and that's very tough for global mobility, because you're making quite difficult decisions, or very difficult decisions, in a compressed time frame. You've got to consider things like exit permits, sponsor controls, visa expiry, transit rules, dependent documentation, and this is all intersecting at the same time, causing this complexity. And this is what I'm hoping to just draw out a few things for you to think about. So as at today, we're seeing that the conflict is spreading beyond the Gulf, and there's been a number of security incidents and emerging in other parts of the Middle East and also neighboring regions. So Lebanon, we've seen Israel forces are striking in locations in the south. We've seen incidents in Cyprus at the Royal Air Force Base, and that prompted the UK and France to deploy warships and air defense assets to the island. And then in Jordan, there's also reports that Iran may be looking at assessing potential actions in the Ashraf 3 base in Albania. and that hosts a number of members of the Iranian opposition movement. And there have been also attacks at targets in US diplomatic facilities across the region. And really what we've seen in response to those particular attacks on US diplomatic posts is that US have advised American citizens to consider leaving the Middle East where possible. We're also seeing drone strikes in Oman, and then there has been specific targeting on energy infrastructure, and this is obviously the whole situation is pushing up the price of oil. And then for companies, which is very complex, Iran has declared that the Strait of Hormuz is closed, and you will know that that is a vital maritime checkpoint for global energy. So that's causing businesses a lot of difficulty. Now, the first thing to say is it's really important to monitor all of the official government advisory sites. Those sites are really good, and it's important to keep monitoring them. And it's important for people to register with their relevant embassies. And for example, for the UK, we were telling people to register at the weekend, and at first it was saying register for updates, and then it quickly changes and says register your presence. But as long as you keep registering, they have a track of you. And then maintain very close coordination with your internal security teams. They're the teams that are able to say actually what is going on the ground, and that's what's very important to find out. And then carefully reassess the necessity, obviously, of any travel into the region. And then I just want to say a few words about airspace and flight status.
That's a great point. You talk about, obviously people are looking to leave, or in some cases governments are saying to leave, or other people just choose to leave. There's an awful lot of people who are out of country at the time who want to get back to their home. So
exactly.
This is going both ways. Yeah.
Yes, it is. It is. And I have to call out the governments, and particularly the UAE and Qatar have been amazing. I mean, they're covering accommodation costs for tourists who are stranded, but they're doing an amazing job at keeping people safe. But also they're coming up with all of these concessions, and they're really helping people who want to come back in to be reunited with their families. And we've had lots of those situations.
And one thing, if I can come in, you talked about people being stranded, and the UAE, as you say, is being amazing, picking up the hotel costs. But there's a lot of people who might be, say, on business trips in Asia or Australia or what have you, and they're stuck there now because they can't get back, or maybe they just can't fly through.
Absolutely.
And their costs aren't being picked up because obviously they're nothing to do with the UAE. So there'll be cost issues there, whether it's personal for tourists or whether it's business related. There's all sorts of knock-on costs around the world coming through this.
Yeah. I mean, there are all sorts of financial implications, price of oil, etc.
Yeah.
So going back to the flight status, it's really important to monitor official updates from the airlines and the aviation authorities. And with the repatriation flights, normally what happens is that transit passengers and visitors, and obviously those in compassionate circumstances, are given priority. But governments are really advising not to go to the airport until you're called. It's really important to follow those advices that are being given out. And also, many of the planes are operating with reduced capacity, i.e. perhaps not big pieces of luggage, perhaps fewer people, because they'll want to accommodate additional fuel in case they have to divert. And the other thing to say, that from an immigration perspective, it's really important to remember that some countries like the UK, every country has different rules, but for the UK, for repatriation, normally it's just British citizens. And if you have a family that are a mixture of British citizens and non-British citizens, and the non-British citizens don't have visa rights for the UK, that can be a problem. So you really need to think about that. If people are repatriating, taking a repatriation flight, what are the rules of that country? And obviously, another thing that's not related to immigration, but it is important to check insurance policies, because there are exclusions that might affect certain evacuation planning. As I said, you know, the government of the UAE have been really fantastic, and so have Qatar and other countries in the region. When and if you're considering evacuation, travellers should in advance confirm border operating statuses, because they change. And at one point, you know, only certain nationals were being allowed through borders. So before travel, it's really important that those are checked, that you also verify entry requirements, immigration entry requirements for onward destinations. So if you're taking people to a certain country and then you want to move them, what is the end country requirements? I've said to register for embassy for alerts, but also another thing is so important, it's maintaining copies of identity and immigration documents. This is something that comes up time and time again on a crisis management situation where people haven't got copies of their right documents. This is really why it's so good to have a business travel tool that everybody in your company uses, and you log these documents, you log their visas, they're all in one place. You know what their dependent status is. One thing I just wanted to say is there have been a number of frauds where fraud and scammers are impersonating crisis management, even from governments. So you have to be really careful and make sure that you're on the right sites and you're responding to the proper official channels.
Gosh, so even in times of crisis,
yeah,
people out there who try and do that sort of stuff.
Yes. And then I wanted to talk about immigration concessions. Numbers of countries have been very good at quickly offering immigration concessions. Israel have given automatic visa extensions on certain categories. If your leave is going to expire between the February the 22nd, March the 31st, they said you can have an extended automatic 3 months. And also they've been very generous about helping people with re-entry visas, because they realize they may be stuck outside Israel. Qatar has given 1 month automatic extensions, and the UAE are being very flexible on discretionary concessions. The next thing I wanted to say is you have to be aware that consular operations are very difficult. So the US has closed many of its diplomatic missions. Others have started closing. They're on reduced staff. So you've got to anticipate cancellations. Numbers of people we know have their passports in those consulates, you know, for applications, and they're now wanting to get them out. So that's quite a difficult situation. And then the other thing I wanted to say is exit permits. Saudi and Kuwait, you need exit permits. So you must remember about that. So in summary, it's really important for GM teams to clarify the population. Just think of everyone that's impacted, employees, dependents, confirm nationality of everybody. You know, do they hold dual nationality? What's their visa status, the expiry dates of those visas, and understand, you know, the exit requirements. And then the final thing I wanted to say is that the compliance doesn't stop there. It carries on when you land, because then, you know, has that person got the right immigration to work? Have they come into a country as a visitor, but they need permission to work? And then also this follows so neatly onto Julie now, because also their tax considerations.
Okay, Julia, that's a really, really important update. So many great points out there that, you know, some of which I think we all know that people should register, but there's so many other points out there that you're talking about that maybe people haven't thought about. This, sadly, I think is going to be a subject we will be coming back to. But we do make a promise to the industry that if we can help and give updates and anything whilst the situation going on, we are here for you in the industry, and hopefully we can all help each other. So, Julia, I know how busy you are. I know you've got a crisis meeting that you need to go to with some of your people. So we're going to say goodbye to you now and wish you all the best. Everybody, as we say goodbye to Julia and we welcome to our stage Julie Barron to talk about the tax implications, please, everybody, hit the heart button, hit the like button, and hit the applause button. Hey, Julie.
Hello, Brian. How are you?
Hi. Yeah, I'm good. So we've got to talk about this important subject. And as ever, there's always tax ramifications to anything.
There are.
We need to understand what's going on. So let's have a talk now about the tax implications that we need to be, even if we don't know the answers, the questions we need to be asking.
Yeah, that's right, Brian. And I only have a couple of short updates, but one of the key considerations is if people leave the Middle East and they go to their home country or another country, what does that mean for their residency status in that country where they are temporarily, especially at this point where we don't know how much time temporarily might be. So, for instance, the UK has a 60-day threshold where you can go back to the UK for 60 days, and those days would be exempt from your residency in times of crisis. But as Julia reminded us before, the excuse me, I'm losing my voice. The 60 days isn't defined. So we don't know for sure whether this crisis would qualify for that relief in the UK. The US has a similar provision for those who are living in the Middle East longer term and who come back to the US. They often exclude income under the physical presence test. And that test requires you to be in a foreign country for a certain number of days every year. And there are reasons that you can exclude US days from that count. And one of those is in times of war or civil unrest. But the list from the IRS of what countries qualify for that doesn't come out right away. You know, it's not instantaneous. So oftentimes you don't know whether you can exclude those days from your day count until many months after the fact. So, you know, there are countries that might
just going on that 60-day point, and we ought to talk about other countries as well, but just taking that point, you know, we don't know yet whether when people come back, they might be longer than 60 days.
Absolutely.
The thing is that, you know, you're treated as non-resident from the date of departure if you meet the various tests. But if you don't meet the various tests, then maybe effectively you were never non-tax resident in the first place.
That's right. That's right. So you really have to look at your populations.
Yeah. I'm assuming other countries have got similar rules about their 183-day rules and exemptions and what have you.
Right.
And maybe, you know, at some point in the next couple of weeks, we need to start looking at what that is. But the point here is that these are questions that we need to be asking. We need to be alert to them.
Absolutely. So if you are evacuating people from the Middle East and bringing them to whatever country, you need to make sure of what the implications are from a tax perspective of bringing those people to those countries and not knowing how long they might be there, what that might mean for them as tax residents. Yeah, it could be a challenge. Or even non-residents who end up working in another country but create a taxable presence there. And on that note, you could have local companies whose employees create a corporate presence in whatever country they might have been evacuated to. Excuse me. So I think that that's also something that needs to be checked, not just an individual tax implication, but a corporate tax implication.
So you might, for example, have an employee of, say, a Dubai company or even whatever, an Australian company based in Dubai, and they're now going back to, say, France or Germany or the UK or US. And the question is then, can they work in that country that they're going home to without creating a PE problem.
Yeah, that's right. And the Middle East doesn't have a very extensive tax treaty network. So that's that's an issue as well, as the treaties are a real problem.
Okay. And I suppose another issue might be people haven't actually started their assignment yet, but who would usually starting, the
Right.
next
There'd be lots of
couple of weeks. And so they're not going. So the question is, what do you do with them? What's the situation? Are you paying them? Maybe they're new employees?
Right. You've accepted a new role to move to the Middle East, and now all of a sudden you're not going to go. So what does that mean? Similar to COVID times, right? Where we had people who had big plans to move and then they couldn't. So does that mean you start doing your job from your home country, or how does that work? And what are the tax implications of that?
Okay. One question that's come up from Richard Majewski. Let's just pull that one up. He said, does it affect any aspect of the tax conversation if someone has 2 passports?
Sometimes it can if you're looking at treaty residency. If the final answer, if you're looking at tax home and where people's center vital interests are, a lot of times the final tiebreaker, if you will, for residency is where you're a citizen. So that could come up if you have citizenship in places. But I mean, the nice thing about 2 passports is it gives you options of different places you can go and live without real challenges as far as where are you allowed to be. So, yeah. One last thing is oftentimes in times like this, countries do allow for tax extensions. A lot of our calendar year countries were coming up on tax deadlines and things like that. So oftentimes when there is a crisis like this, you might get an extension on time to file your tax return. So there's one little piece of good news. If you've had to abandon all of your paperwork and everything like that and be evacuated, oftentimes you can get a tax extension. So look into that for whatever countries you might be.
So if you take the US, for example, I mean, you might have people who are, in whatever, Dubai or Saudi or somewhere. They've had to come back in a hurry. They haven't taken all their paperwork with them, and they've got to file their US tax returns.
Yeah.
So that might be, and the US, presumably the IRS hasn't made any rulings on that yet.
Right. There's been no ruling yet, but oftentimes they will rule that in times like this, you can have an extension of time to file your tax return.
Yeah.
So that's something to look into if you're concerned about where your paperwork is and getting all that paperwork in on time. So just make sure you're keeping up with the alerts there.
Yeah. It reminds me of some levity to the situation. The old joke is that if you're ever feeling down and think that nobody cares about you, try not filing a tax return.
Right, exactly. They'll come after you. They'll find you. Yes, you'll feel the love.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, okay, Julie, are we sort of done on the tax aspect?
I think so. Yeah.
Again, so much to talk about, and we will carry on talking about it. But the world does carry on as well. And we've got Sean, our regular guest, Sean Luitjens, who's going to be talking about moving from comp strategy to move execution and the link between comp strategy and global mobility. A good friend of the show, been on the show before in different roles, but everybody, how it works. Let's say a big, big thank you to the amazing Julie Barron for that last minute update on such a fast moving story. And let's welcome to our stage, Sean Luitjens. Hey, Sean.
How's it going?
So we're going to go back to normality, which seems a bit odd in the current environment, but, everyone does have their day jobs and there's work to do and there's things to talk about. So, Sean, let's just kick off. Tell us a bit about yourself, because I know you've got a bit of a mobility background. You were with Air Inc. at one point, but tell us a bit about yourself and how you got into this particular game.
So if you go way back, actually, I jumped in as a developer. So I come from a development background, starting with Fidelity, et cetera, and then ended up at a company called Monster.com back in the days.
Wow, remember that?
Yeah, way back machine. So was one of the first developers there when we launched that. and then actually took a really weird turn. So in the world of comp and mobility finds you, you don't find it. It just, I ended up at Mercer, working the benefits database business and helping them kind of relaunch that globally. The person I worked for there, we took a turn, ended up as the CEO of Steve Brink, ended up as CEO at Air Inc., who I had not really heard of or spent time in mobility.
Steve Brink, yeah.
Yeah, so I hadn't been around mobility much. He went there and asked if I wanted to bounce over to Air Inc. And so I spent 8 years there, which weirdly is the longest job I've ever had at one company, was in mobility. And then really bounced back over to Comp and Ben, which is where I spend most of my time in the total rewards side.
Cool. Okay. So then you're now with salary.com, which I'm guessing a lot of people will know, but there might be people who don't. So tell us a bit about salary.com, what its history, what it does, and your role there.
Yeah, so it's been around about 26 years. So actually my first business interaction being a developer was with salary.com. So
was it one of the original .com businesses then?
It was, and actually I was the developer that was responsible for integrating salary.com Salary Wizard into the tool. And then someone just decided they wanted me to deal with a contract too. So that was the first time I ever did anything on the business front. Fast forward, I did a stint with salary.com in 2008, 9, 10. They sold to IBM. And then I've looped back. So it's my first boomerang job. Salary.com, if you think about the total rewards aspect or the compensation aspect, about having benchmark data of any type, being able to put that in a simple place, create bands, ranges, grades, do all that type of stuff. And then through the comp planning phase, the merit process, that's the platform and data set that salary.com specializes in right now.
Wow. Okay. And what sort of size is salary.com?
So, companies wise, we have about 12,000 companies we work with. I would say the bulk are US, North America-ish. And then we have some either global multinationals or a few around the world. And then starting to expand our network with some resellers and partners internationally.
Okay. So let's just talk about comp generally. What's changed with compensation over the last, say, 5 years? What are the differences that you're seeing in comp structure?
So the biggest thing is the EU PTD. So if you think about the pay transparency directive, and that's kind of bled into this place of where compensation data is out there. And so companies, and you can see it where it ties to mobility, everybody knows what everybody else is making. They're allowed to talk about it. They're sharing it. Employees have access or rights to get access to what they make and in their band and range. And so that starts to bleed into, you get some of the mobile employees. And so the biggest piece is compensation that used to be a black box, Brian, where, some of us are old enough to remember when it was the personnel department, maybe, where you couldn't talk about your pay. And it was, an offense where you might have to go talk to human resources, or it was really uncomfortable in the office to talk with people about pay. That's now out there. And so I think what was a black box, you now have to be able to communicate, if you're the compensation team, why people make what they make, because they're sharing it. Pay transparency means jobs are posted with ranges out in the market. And so obviously employees are going out and looking and seeing what is posted and comparing that to themselves. So I think that is probably the biggest piece, that the secret sauce behind compensation philosophy and why people made what they made is now a little bit more out in the open.
Yeah. So presumably, there's data out there, but presumably there's also whispers of wrong data and people are getting the wrong end of the stick. And so is a lot of it about actually saying that the data is right? It's just that you haven't fully understood the data.
Yeah. So there's a lot of data out there, right? So there's payroll data, there's job posting data, there's survey data. I see Nitsan.
Yeah. About us on salaries, yeah.
Well, why don't someone needs to send Nitsan a note about yesterday's match too, while we're at it. I'm glad actually I can make fun of him before today's match with Arsenal, because that's Murphy's Law. So I think on the compensation side and the data, there's a lot of different data sources out there. But the question is, are you really comparing, not just apples to apples anymore? Used to be, we don't want to compare apples to oranges. Now it's not just apples to apples, but are we comparing, Mac apples to Mac apples and Gal apples to Gal apples and, those type of apples. And so does the data line up? And that's where there is kind of a link to mobility, because you talk about, do I have a global job and a grade, and is that job marked the right way? And how do I compare that to other people's roles in other locations, other countries, other geographies?
So this is going to be more about host-based programs, I guess, when you're getting mobility people, because that must be so hard to do. Because if you're moving somebody onto a host-based package, there's host-based and host-based. If you're coming from, say, a high-cost country and you're going to a low-cost country, and there's locals who are doing a similar job at a lower cost, how do you then start squaring that from a comp point of view?
So they're going to share. I mean, I think that's, again, the transparency means now you're going to drop somebody into either if people are listening, you can't see the air quotes, but the permanent move or the host-based moved, right? So you're going to have to put them into that salary structure where they're going. And that's the piece. If they're moving from, low wage to high wage, that's one issue. And you also have the issue going high wage to low wage, right? If you're going to move them down, you're going to have to explain that. So I think the knee-jerk reaction is this is a bad thing. Because now the data is all out there and I have to explain it. But I also think it's a good thing because you can walk through your methodology, your philosophy, how you ended up with that pay. And then when you talk about a host-based package, you can start to talk about, well, here's your actual base pay. And then if you are doing like a 1-year step down so that you can learn to live like a local or any of those things, you can explain those items really pragmatically versus, here's an amount of money and we took a guess. So you can really use the science behind it. But that creates the need to really benchmark those jobs. And so what is a manager in one region might be a director in another region. You've got titles like managing director, which, there are no managing directors in America. There's managing directors in EU. So what is that like role when you move them across and making sure that that is a like for like comparison when they sit across from somebody else?
So at what point in a typical move, does the global mobility manager sit down with the compensation manager and say, actually, how should we be structuring this package? Or does it tend not to happen that much? I mean, what's your practical experience of this?
I think it's happening more. I think you're seeing the departments get tighter around, hey, I am moving them, to London and I want to move them to this role. Can you help me? And this is what the London office needed. And this is the role they're filling. And now let's go back to compensation and look at the job architecture in London, look at the job architecture in the US. What is the like role? And then what is the market price for that role? Because you have multiple problems when you move somebody on a local package. You've got the internal equity issue. So it might be that, Ryan, you make more than I do. When you move next to me, you won't complain about making more than your peers in the office. But what if we pay at the 35th percentile in that marketplace? You might end up just bouncing to somebody else in London, right? So now I paid for the move and you just decided to leave because we were underpaid in the market. So I think it's allowing the mobility department to come to the comp team, wherever that data is, and say, what is the internal market? What is this going to mean when I move Brian there? And then what does it mean externally? So when he goes out and meets people in the marketplace and talks to others in the marketplace, is he going to feel like he's fairly compensated?
And how does salary.com get involved in this process? I mean, what are you doing for companies to help them? Where do you fit into the picture?
Yeah, so us and if you think about the platform we have, there are spot solutions along the way as well. So I generally, Brian, I don't market salary, but the technology that's available and data is available to compensation teams is everything from having a job architecture solution so that you can pull in all your jobs, you can create that job architecture, you can create the crosswalks, for lack of a better term, between what is that job here versus the job that we're moving into in London. And then we can go ahead, assimilate all the data that we have, the job posting data that's out on the marketplace. We can help you pull in other third-party surveys and data sources, create the ranges and bands. Again, when you've got those ranges and bands, I know when I drop you over, what's that's going to mean inside of our company. And then you have the merit and you have pay. The one thing we haven't talked about is kind of, and I don't think it's out there yet, is the pay equity side of this. If you're in London on a host-based package, do you count towards the pay equity? And are you, in the reporting for the EU PTD? Will you be a London or are you in the country that you started from?
Yeah. And what do most companies do?
Well, that piece I don't think has been solved yet. So I think the EU PTD is June is kind of the deadline. There's a lot of right to information pieces, and I think that's where this will start to come out, Brian. So it's called Article 7 inside of the EU PTD means European employees will have the ability to go ask and say, where am I? And then where are my peers at in my salary range or my cohort? And that might be just by gender or not. It might be more specific depending on the country.
Okay.
And you're going to be able to get access to that data. Now, will an American who's working in France be able to go over and get that? That I think is yet to be determined. Will they be able to go and see where I am compared to my local peers, or will my peers, in air quotes again, be fellow Americans?
Cool. And how much of this, in terms of getting it right, is about building the strategy, and how much it actually is about the execution? And tell us about how those two sides come together.
Well, there's always, so compensation, a lot like mobility, right? Is an art and a science, right? That goes with it. And so you can get the science. So the phrase I use a lot, Brian, is humans are highly statistically predictable and amazingly individually unique. And so you can come up with a great, a pay range, a strategy, the whole thing. This is what the role should be, move it over, come up with the entire plan. But then we have to sit down with you, Brian, and say, we're moving you to London. This is what it means. And this is just the pay piece. You still have the rest of the package, for an expat, you still have the rest of the package to put together. That all has to get rolled into that. So it gets highly complex. So the comp piece is important. And then, that becomes the art side. I really want Brian to go. I really want him to be over there. We might pay higher in the range. Brian really wants to go. We might pay him, equitable, or just make it more of a lateral for him on the pay, and then deal with all the rest of the mobility issues.
Yeah, I mean, that's okay if there's only sort of like one or two Brians out there who are being moved, but there are companies who might be moving, 50, 100, 1,000 people. Does that make it harder or easier if you're moving?
No, I think technology has solved that. So you'll see, if you think about the move being an offer, right? So it's an offer of some kind. It is an offer, right? That offer management piece of it, or the ability to say, here's why we're going to pay you where you are. It's very similar to talent acquisition. It's very similar to, what HR and compensation does, or what managers do when they think about moving people around.
Right, got it. And I was just wondering then that if that's a lot of it is about the execution, where does it go? Let's concentrate on the negative for a moment. Where does it tend to go wrong? I mean, there's strategy, there's execution, and then of course right down the chain there's payroll. I think we've got to get into payroll a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I usually throw payroll out. I mean, generally payroll executes at a really high level with what they've been told to process. And, I'll kind of leave it at there. I think where it goes wrong when you think about getting host-based packages is the first one is, mobility decided to go with the ostrich method. So they just put their head in the sand. They don't really, I'm just going to pay, Brian makes this much here. I'm going to move him here. I'm just going to, do an FX change and drop him over there and then gross it up for his local living. Now you really haven't looked at the local cost of labor. You're only addressing costs of living. And so you have this issue of when you get dropped into the new location that you're not proper in the range. You're either, way too high and all the locals are now upset, or you're way too low and you're a little upset that, you don't have the same purchasing power as everybody else where you are. But it is easier, right? If you don't have to go deal with compensation, get the ranges, do the justification, ask why we're going to pay more, it's a lot simpler. And then I think where it goes wrong is, on the flip side is, you get the gross ups and everything else wrong. But there's only one Brian Friedman.
They sing that every week at the local football stadiums. But Sean, actually, another question from Rob, and always great to see you on our show, Rob, is how can mobility leaders learn more about comp concerns so they can compel comp to be more likely to involve mobility in conversation? So how can mobility learn more so they can actually get the comp people to bring them into the game.
Yeah, I you know, a cup of coffee with the comp team, I think could go a long ways. I won't lie, I came from the other side. I think both of them have this perspective without, you know, walking a mile in the other person's shoes, that it's not that hard. And so, you know, hey, how hard is it to pay people? Not that hard. You dive down into compensation and total rewards at 30,000, you know, get down to ground level. It's very complicated. There's a lot of data that goes in. Same with mobility. A lot of people are like, well, how hard is it, right? I just organize some movers and pay a currency exchange and line up some housing. How hard is it? And I found out the hard way how hard it is when I went, you know, and jumped into the mobility space. I'm like, you know, holy crap, this is super complex. And so I think just understanding each other's worlds and how it plays into them is the first thing where you can start to do that. I think the EU PTD will help a lot with that for those that are in Europe. And even in the US, the pay transparency, if you move someone to the US, they're going to see the other job postings for like jobs at your place or other places. They're allowed to talk to their peers in the same office on what they make. And so I think, you know, compel is probably a good word. I feel like mobility and comp will be compelled to talk to each other and just make the process more seamless. Can we get, you know, can we get data, comp data, a dashboard to show what the ranges are, just an n size of one? You start getting hundreds and thousands. We've got to have a process in place. And same thing on the data reporting.
Okay. So if you were working with a global mobility professional and you wanted to help them do their job better from a comp point of view, what advice would you give?
Yeah, I think just a comp 101 class, like make your, you know, like mobility, you know, you can start at 30,000 feet. You don't have to do the work. Like I definitely do not want to be a global mobility professional. I understand enough to know what they do. And that was enough for me to decide I don't want to do that. And I think the same thing, go in and figure out, how does comp work? What is a pace, you know, what is a job architecture? What is a career framework? What does it mean to have a point factor system and put someone in a range or grade a job? And then what does it mean when they pay inside that range? Just have those basic understandings of the mechanics of it so that you can kind of talk with them across and be like, this is the problem we have, or not problem.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating because I think comp teams and mobility teams talk different languages.
Yeah.
You know, they're doing something very similar. They're trying to sort out how to get somebody the right level of pay to ensure they can do their job. Yeah. But the approach is also different. I mean, mobility is all about allowances and I don't know, you know, gross ups or international benefits, and then it's about visas and all that sort of stuff. Whereas comp is so much more about, you know, the other aspects of the, you know, job ranges, job architecture, performance pay. And we haven't even talked about equity yet. I mean, I don't mean pay equity, I mean stock equity.
Yeah.
There's so many issues there. How would you actually sort of put those two languages together? I mean, how do they talk together, these people?
Both of them have the same problem. So I spent a lot of time talking to comp professionals, and it's the same story that you would to mobility professionals, is you've got to be able to translate it from global mobility or compensation dork to a human. And so what does your program look like? And so a lot of times I tell companies to go talk to their marketing team, and generally for two reasons. The first reason being, marketing teams, they're in-house, so you don't have to go out of house. They're used to taking a message and culling it down to something that's understandable, you know, at the most a minute, 15 to 30 seconds, because that's how much attention people have now. And basically that's the message that you want to get across. And so they're going to ask questions about, what does this mean really? Secondly, hopefully there's not many marketing people on here, Brian, but usually I have people say, go to marketing, because if marketing can understand what you're trying to communicate, anybody can. And so you've kind of boiled it down now to the lowest common denominator. There are terms in mobility, and the one I pick on a lot in comp is comp ratio, which is a ratio of a ratio. And there's, you know, that's a horrible number for people to try to then explain to somebody inside of mobility who's like, a ratio of a ratio. Like, you need to translate that into something that you can then, you know, send down to an employee.
Okay. Tell me a few words about the equity side of compensation. How should they be structuring that from a mobility point of view?
That's like, how many hours do we have?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of.
We have 9 minutes, Sean.
Yeah. So we don't have time. I mean, so on short-term incentives, I think, so if you have base pay, you have short-term incentives, you have long-term incentives, the three major buckets that are there. And you were talking about stock grants, equity, the long-term incentives, the short-term incentives. The general guidance I've given clients is you want to mirror that 1 year total cash to wherever the local plan is, right? So you definitely don't want to have them on a 1 year total cash and have them partially on, host base and partially on the home base. That becomes a mess. On the equity side, it's just, I know you had the tax person on there before, like that's, between council and tax, two exciting groups of people to go talk to, Brian. That's kind of where you have to start, because what you grant in the US may not have tax ramifications, but where you grant in, Belgium, they may have to pay the tax on those that they may not see for years. And so it gets super complicated when you start moving across borders, when you start talking about LTIP. And that's where, you just have to go talk to the tax professional. What does that mean on so many levels? If they're breaking residency, so if you're Canadian and you break residency, what does that mean? Like, there's so many complications with that, Brian. It's so specific. That's where the affinity matrix, I think, you talk about mobility, talks about a lot. I actually wish more comp people would use that, kind of that term or that process of having an affinity matrix between where you move, where your home and host are and how that all ties together. Same thing, but it's just too complicated, other than you just can't make assumptions.
Well, let's move from complex to simple. Let's flip it around. If you could advise a global mobility leader to standardize just one piece of compensation input to prevent escalations, what would it be? What can they do best from a comp point of view, to stop problems arising, escalations arising?
Yeah, it's not sexy, Brian, but the job architecture, and really understanding the job architecture so that you can compare a manager in this location as a director in this location, or, an associate 2 is a manager in another location, but really being able to look at a global, if you've got multinational operations, that you have a global job architecture that aligns those roles. Because now we can put everyone, if you can imagine having that architecture or that grid for every country, we can align it the right way to make sure that we can look at people across the board. That also will allow you to do things like pay equity regionally. There's a lot of good that comes from it. Is the job fun? For sure it is not. You have to interview roles. What are they actually doing in that country? It's not nearly as fun as like talking about all the really cool math and things we could do, that I probably would dig on more, but it's the functional foundation for really being able to have a solid compensation program that you can then translate over to a mobility program.
Okay, we've got a great question coming from Dana Whitman. And the question is this: how can we better align mobility COLA data with comp benchmarks so geographic pay structures remain competitive? Do you want to give that a go? Sure.
So you've got COLA data. So the theory for me with COLA data and mobility is you've got the pay structures locally are a cost of labor issue. The COLA data is so that I can get them to live locally or be local when I move them. When you start talking about COLA adjustments, or do you pay by COLA, that's probably another couple hour program, Brian, around, do I have a set pay in one place and pay geodiffs based on where we're going? But when you line mobility COLA data, in my perspective, it has always been, we're going to pay the local range, and those people live like locals, and I'm going to move you to that local place in that range, and then I'm going to make those COLA adjustments as needed.
Cool, got it. So it's an interesting comment coming in from Dana, but let's talk about payroll, because that is the other side of all this. I mean, when it gets through to payroll, what are the problems that you see, and how does that potentially erode trust in the entire system?
Payroll is one of those interesting things, right? If you get it wrong once out of 50 times, that's not good, right? I mean, it's just such a tough gig. for them. From a compensation standpoint,
I suppose nobody ever said you handled my payroll really well, did they? I mean,
yeah, usually when I talk to payroll groups, there's that one. And the other email we've never seen is the, the analogy I use is no one sends an email to tech and says, hey, I appreciate you have gotten all my email for the last year. Like that, that exists with the same thing. Like, hey, good job, payroll, I got paid. I think it's really concatenating those different items, Brian. So if you are paying someone on, I think it's more when you have them on a home-based program. So you've got a lot of maths going around that happen. When you move them to a local pay or host pay, I think that tends to go a little bit easier, but then you have the allowances. Are those allowances working? And as those allowances or tax changes, that's the biggest issue. From a comp perspective, truly a comp perspective, we're usually laying down, here's the range, here's the number. Once that gets done, it gets handed over to the local HRIS system. And so there's sometimes a gap there. Did the number get moved over, or did we just move Brian to London and we just did an FX change? We didn't actually move him to the local payroll, range.
Yeah, I mean, we at Benevo do a huge amount with comp accumulation and helping companies work it out. But tell us, from your perspective, the importance of comp accumulation from a comp perspective as opposed to from a mobility perspective.
You just don't see it. From our perspective, I think that's one of those terms, Brian, that mobility needs to explain to compensation because it has the word comp in it. And they're like, I have no concept of what's going on. Comp usually, right? So if you think about the way comp works is that their general role is create the pay philosophy. They go ahead and create the ranges, hopefully and then it gets affected in two ways from that point when you have the ranges. Three, if you count mobility, so I've been probably as bad and not highlighting that when people get dropped into a range. But generally, it's when you hire somebody, you have that piece. So talent acquisition hires them and, in or out of the range. And then you have during the merit process. And that merit process, through the years, like, well, where are they paid? And they could get a different increase based on where they are in the range. Those are the two effective places you see it. You don't see it in the same way.
Okay. And I suppose one last question, because we're running out of time now, is what can companies do to avoid budget surprises during localization? Because people obviously are trying to localize and we're trying to put a budget, a cost estimate, and then they go to the comp people. What can they do, the quick answer, to avoid surprises? What tips can you give us?
Yeah, I'd get the range, getting that range early from a comp perspective, Brian, is getting that range early, right? So especially when you have wage differentials, like you were talking about earlier, high wage to low wage or vice versa. So like you don't want to just sit and think we're going to have the FX change when we move them, right? We're going to move from dollars to quid. You want to make sure that actually when we move them to London, that range might not be just that, it might be significantly higher. And so when you do move them to local range, or you have to make that adjustment after they get there and they realize that they're underpaid, or the locals realize they're underpaid, that's when that surprise happens. And then, as you know, better than the comp people, that snowballs in mobility, right? So the tax increase, everything increases at such a higher significant rate because it snowballs on top of that. And so
it's like a multiplier. Yeah.
And so what becomes like a normal comp problem that is like, oh crap, let's fix that with this, gets escalated much higher. So the number just gets so much bigger and it touches so many more people, right? Than just a normal comp mistake.
Okay, so Sean, it's been amazing having you on the show. We're pretty much out of time. I just wanted to tell everybody that we are back next week and we're going to be talking, we have Alexander Ada from Pearson, Global Mobility Director at Pearson, and we're going to be talking about how the company has transformed itself from being a very well-established, highly recognized, much loved analog publisher to a completely different and the world leading learning company powered by technology. So amazing changes coming up there. That's on our show next week. I'll bring Tally back onto stage.
Unfortunately, Julie and Julia had to go for some emergencies. Yeah, it's week. Yeah.
It's such a big issue, everything we've talked about. And our promise to the industry is if we can do anything to provide information, assistance, a platform for people to share with what's going on in the world at the moment, then we are here for you. Hopefully these things settle down, but who knows? Who knows? Those things are certainly nothing that any of us control. All we can do is look at it from a mobility perspective. So everybody, take care, have a great week, and wherever you are in the world, stay safe. Bye.
Bye.